In this video, we're going to talk about surveys. So surveys are where you get a large number of respondents to answer very specific questions. So very standardized questions. It's sort of like when you take your standardized tests and the possibilities for how you respond are extremely limited, but at the same time, it's very easy for those standardized tests to be compiled into big picture data about how your school is doing and how the country's doing and how you're doing and so on. So in this video, we're going to talk about Ellis, another imaginary student who really dreads writing and just is not happy about having to take this composition course, and writing has always kind of just made him like really tense up and feel really inadequate. And so when he talks to his composition teacher about it and he's like, well, what do I do about this? His composition teacher says, you know what, you're normal. Lots of people experience this. It's Writing anxiety is a documented thing, and there's a lot of strategies we can use to get over it, but you're normal. And so he starts to wonder, well, how normal is it? And so he thinks about what population does he really want to study. And he says, well, college freshmen, that sounds like a good idea. They often have to take these writing classes, and they may not be comfortable expressing that anxiety, but we need to know if it's present. So he decides that the best way to do this, because he's dealing with a very sensitive subject, people are often embarrassed by writing anxiety and might not want to talk about it, is to do an anonymous survey where his subjects don't have to identify themselves in any way. They don't have to do any writing in any way. So something that they can just do very quickly but still be very honest with. And it also will give him a big picture, because he wants to know how normal these writing anxiety symptoms are. And so he is looking for big picture data, something that's generalizable. So he starts working on how is he going to ask these questions in a way that will not force his respondents to give him the answers that he's looking for, but rather will give him honest answers. For instance, I'm sure you've had the experience of taking one of those silly personality quizzes online, and they give you 4 options for an answer, and you're like, none of those describe me. Like, I frequently run into this problem when those quizzes are like, choose a drink, and they're all alcoholic cocktails, and I've never had an alcoholic cocktail I like. And I'm like, how about none of those? So you might run into that problem if you design your questions poorly. Or yesterday I was taking a personality quiz on behalf of my cat, and it asked, how does your cat respond to strangers? And it had options like she ignores them, or she loves them, or she likes them if they give her treats. My cat hides under the couch. So that wasn't an option, though, which forced me to choose an option that didn't actually reflect reality. So when you're designing a survey, you want to absolutely test the validity of your questions. You want to make sure that what you are asking is not guiding your participants in one way or another, or if there's no way to ask a question in a fairly objective way, that you ask questions that approach the question from multiple angles so that you can validate within your survey, are they answering this consistently? And so in Ellis's survey instrument that we're going to look at in a minute, he's actually done that pretty well. It's not a perfect survey instrument, but it's good enough for his purposes for what he's trying to do. So what he decides to do is, one, he wants to make sure his participants don't have to do any writing. So he wants to make sure that everything he does is either a multiple choice or a Likert scale, where you select on a scale of like 1 to 5, whether you agree or disagree, or things that you can just click on. 2, he wants to make sure that they have a chance to fully express themselves, and that's in conflict with the not doing any writing. So he starts thinking about surveys he's taken and what examples he can think of, and he thinks about personality surveys, that you might take for. They use them for psychological diagnosis. They use them for hiring documents where they want to do a personality profile of you or something like that, where you read a statement and then you say, does this describe me or not? And so he uses what's called a Likert scale, where he says strongly agree to strongly disagree, with the agree and disagree and neutral. And you've probably encountered this before. And so he decides he's going to ask 10 questions because he doesn't want to spend a lot of his participants' time, but he does need to be able to validate his questions within the survey instrument. So he creates his survey. His first question: when I get a writing assignment, I get started as soon as possible. Second question: I tend to avoid writing assignments, so I wind up doing them at the last minute. Notice how these questions are asking essentially the same thing, but they're doing it from the opposite direction. And this is how Ellis is trying to avoid guiding his participants one way or another, but rather see if they're responding consistently to his questions. 3, I am often afraid that I will do poorly on a writing assignment. 4, I would rather take a multiple choice test than write an essay. Again, these are asking very similar questions, but they have to in order to be valid. And so one is more generalization about how do you feel when you have a writing assignment, and the other is a more concrete, okay, would you rather? But they're asking essentially the same thing, which is, how do you feel about those? 5, I enjoy writing papers. 6, I am good at writing papers. Notice that those are very different questions, and he did that on purpose, because you can enjoy a thing without feeling like you're good at it, and you can feel like you're good at a thing without enjoying it. And so he thinks that it's very important to measure both of those. 7, I struggle with writing for school. 8, I enjoy writing outside of school assignments. So in this case, he's essentially asking the same thing: do you struggle with writing? But he does it intentionally, one in a negative way and one in a positive way, so that he can measure that consistency again. 9, when I have to write for school, it makes reading and writing outside of school less fun. So now he's asking, does this affect your life in other ways than just writing? And 10, I wish teachers gave more time on writing assignments. So now he's starting to wonder, why does this writing anxiety happen? Is it the deadlines, or is it something else? And so he already kind of knows the purpose of each of these things. So with this instrument, he can measure, are they responding highly to anxious sounding statements and low to non-anxious, or is there a mix, or what's going on there? And it will give him clear numbers that he can actually analyze those results in a quantitative way. He decides he wants 50 participants. He only gets 23. But then his teacher's like, 23 is a lot for the constraints of your assignment right now. And nearly half of your respondents actually responding is a lot. So, putting that in perspective, that is a very successful study. And so he decides to go on with that project. So when you're doing a survey, don't get too ambitious. Try to keep it short for your audience, because they're giving you their time freely and you want to respect that. And you're more likely to get more responses the shorter your survey is. But also make sure that as you design your survey, that you design your questions in ways that don't sort of prompt a specific answer, or if you do, that you design questions that will counterbalance those to make sure that it's not just the way you're asking the questions, but actually you are measuring what you say you're measuring. And that's what we mean when we talk about validity in a survey. So that's how surveys work.